When each and every one of us were born, when we were brought into this life, a decision was made on that very day of our births. We were either given a special note or we weren't. This special note is an invitation to the party. The party is the good life. It's not necessarily the perfect life. You're gonna be a rock star, you're gonna be a millionaire, you're gonna be, a successful guru on a magazine that everybody knows. No, that's the very fortunate. I'm talking about the party, the regular party. That if you're invited to it, you're going to have friends. You're going to have the normal life that those that have it don't even know what those that don't have it are missing out on. They can't even conceptualize that other people don't have the invite to this party, this normal life.
Yikes, Drayyythan. Have you tried being confident?
With school starting back up, I figured the least I could do is make a video about the college experience, as well as some general advice for college. So this is one of those videos that I've been sitting on for about a year. No joke. I started this script a year ago, recorded part of it, but just never got around to finishing it. It was just sitting there in the Drayyythan vault for months, collecting digital dust. But this is a question I've gotten in the past, and this dude was nice enough to reach out and ask me, so I figured I'd make a full-length video on it. So as many of you know, I'm in college. I'm actually starting my 4th and hopefully final year on Monday. Part of me is kind of glad I waited this long to publish the video, since some opinions and overall thoughts regarding this topic have changed in the past year. But without further ado, let's begin. First of all, the idea of college is quite comedic when you think about it. Taking a bunch of hormonal young adults and throwing them into some city to interact with each other for 4 years straight is a pretty interesting concept. Colleges love to sell the experience as more than just learning, right? Especially in the United States. They sell it as this huge zone where every day is just partying and getting wasted, with some learning sprinkled into the mix. So here's my first rule of advice. The first thing you have to realize is that if you got zero play in high school, things aren't going to magically change on their own in college. During welcome week, you're going to get mogged even worse than in high school. It seems like every guy is at least 6 feet tall with a 6 out of 10 face. And I'm not saying it's impossible to turn your life around here socially. Many people definitely do, but I was sold this false idea that things would generally be easier once I got into college. I know I'm gonna get crucified for saying this, and people are gonna lose their minds. But honestly, the peak of social interaction in your life is in high school. And listen very carefully to what I'm trying to say here. I'm not saying it's the peak of economic success or even peak life satisfaction, but just socially. For most people, that's when all the district's middle school population joins together, and you get to basically meet everyone your age that lives in your town. And if you can't really get high school right, it's gonna be tough to make up for it. Many people, including me, thought that college would be a novel experience where you can make up for lost time. But if anything, college is even emptier and lonelier than high school. Because remember, this is your first taste of adulthood, being left to your own devices, not constantly under the watchful eye of adults like in high school. You are responsible for yourself. While I do think the independence is a net positive, it means that the time you have to yourself, those empty gaps, are far more vapid and soul-crushing than high school. It felt like in high school, at least things happened, even if they were bad. There's always something going on, seeing as you were basically trapped in a prison with all the other teenagers in your area from morning to afternoon. If you guys watching are in high school, sorry to burst your bubble. I came into college thinking that things would be different and that every day would be full of opportunities to meet people because I was away from my strict parents and was surrounded by thousands of students my own age. But really, that makes it more brutal. Most people reach their prime attractiveness during the ages of 18 to 22, which just so happens to be the age of college students. So basically, everywhere you go, every corner you turned, you just get mogged to the 4th dimension and back. The campus gym, mogged by muscular chads. The library, mogged by chads reading. The dining hall, mogged by hungry chads. And you might be thinking to yourself, oh damn, at least the mog ends when I get home. Because in high school, once the bell rings, at least the mog ends for the day. You can go home and be peacefully unaware that your peers are hanging out and making memories without you, outside of checking Instagram. Maybe if you have really outgoing siblings, you'd be subjected to a little bit of mogging at home, but in college, you get mogged when you go home too, if you live on campus. Most students live in dorms, and I remember my freshman year, I could hear people partying through the walls, and for the last 2 years when I lived in a dilapidated apartment a little off campus, it was the same deal. People upstairs were just your run-of-the-mill white girls, and all they did was just party. But the thing is, they literally partied every single night, even on Monday and Tuesday nights. There was always some generic pop song playing on their giant speakers, or there were a bunch of dudes yelling at the top of their lungs. It's not like you ever get a minute of peace. It's not like an episode of Friends where you magically become joined at the hip with your neighbors either. Maybe for good looking, sure, but for me, they legit just give me blank stares every day when I walked past them. This year, I live in a house with 3 floors, surprisingly for the same amount of rent as last year. Not much better, but at least there aren't noisy neighbors upstairs. And this brings us to our next lesson, location. It's quite important, and is something you have to keep in mind. Where you live can either give you a massive social outlet, or break your morale. I recommend everyone try to live in a dorm, or on campus their first year if they can. Just experience it. Obviously, if money is a concern, then commute, because finances always come first. But if you can help it, I don't think you have much to lose in your first year by just dorming. I have some guys here who did that and then realized they weren't getting play, so they decided to just commute their remaining years. If you go to college insanely far from your hometown, you don't really get much say in this and are forced to live on campus all 4 years. But for those of you who live relatively close to where you're studying at, try to think about it. Because think of it this way. If you're socially isolated in a room and you have to share a disgusting bathroom and bedroom with a stranger without any upsides, you might as well go home and enjoy some privacy. I mean, for fuck's sake, my new bedroom door doesn't even have a lock on it. But anyway, my first year, I mostly stayed in my dorm room during the weekend, but I realized there wasn't really anything for me to do here. And this was before I started going out frequently, so I just found it frustrating more than anything, seeing everyone else down on the ground as I peered out the window curtains on a Friday night. During my 3rd year of college, I went back to my hometown far more often, because I would rather spend that time with my family getting home-cooked meals from my mom, instead of just eating slop at the dining halls or making stress meals in the microwave. And along with location, try to find roommates that have similar interests as you, especially if you're trying to socialize. I do think a large part of my isolation in my early years was due to having unenthusiastic roommates. I decided to room with 2 of my closest friends from high school, Ned and Jake. But they never talked about girls or partying or anything like that. Either they know it's over for them, or they just truly don't care. But for me, I desperately just wanted to socialize. I highly recommend just hitting that squad fill button and rooming with randos instead of trying to room with your high school friends. Admittedly, I definitely had some of the most interesting memories at college with Ned and Jake, but if I could do it all over again, I would have just taken those first 2 years to live with new people. I remember my freshman year, one guy in my major, who was actually somewhat popular and well-liked, needed a 3rd guy for his place the next year, and he called me to see if I was interested. But at that point, I already assigned to a cheap place with Ned and Jake again, so I had to decline. And you know, I completely forgot about this until writing the script. But I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I took him up on that opportunity. Sure, maybe I would have had to deal with that guy partying and not including me, but maybe it could have gone the other way around, and I would have opened up some doors I wouldn't have otherwise. I have had some random roommates since then, but none that were as enthusiastic or outgoing as that guy. So I really haven't had that many people over for the most part. Next up, you should ideally try to join one campus organization, especially if you're trying to get into postgraduate education, since it looks good on your resume. But more importantly than that, it's also a decent way to meet people. I mean, most of my friends that I hang out with, I just met through school organizations. And sure, I know it's mostly just a normie platitude, oh bro, just go meet people through clubs, but sometimes it works. But you never know. Just make sure it doesn't take over your life. There were times where I needed to get promoted in the organizations, so I ended up doing more work for it. All for free, by the way. I remember for one of them, I ended up hosting a party as a fundraiser, and Jake got mad at me. He was like, oh dude, I don't like having parties, you know that. Like, come on, we do nothing 364 days of the year. Just let me have one night. But no, he actually got his mom to pick him up and leave for the weekend. He actually took his Xbox home too. Like, bro, you really can't just play games on your laptop for 2 days instead. And as for Ned, he literally locked himself in his room and didn't come out the whole time. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with being antisocial or not really wanting to do these types of things. But as for somebody who's pretty outgoing, such as myself, I do definitely kind of wish I picked people who are more aligned with my goals, if that makes sense. Depending on what your school is like, you may have a strong Greek life on campus, or none at all. I know this is like a US thing, and that most European schools don't have frats or sororities, not to my knowledge at least. And as some of you know, my parents are really strict and against all that kind of stuff. There's no way I would be able to join a frat to begin with, since you need a parent signature for that. And even if I did, I have a feeling it'd be a lot like high school sports were for me. Something that should be fun, but I just end up not fitting in anyways. Like, why go through all that hazing the first few weeks just to maybe get a bid? Some of you frat bros watching are gonna be like, oh, but there's no hazing. Come here for a second.
Yes, the fuck there is.
When I went to New York a year ago with my buddy, he decided to visit a friend of his who went to college there. They knew each other from a summer program and stayed in contact ever since. And I'm not going to say what school it was, nor do I even remember which frat he was in, but some of the shit he was telling my friend that he had to partake in was weird as fuck, man. And for what? House parties in some dingy basement. The only way I'd really want to join a frat is if it was at a top private school where the connections might actually be relevant. Sorry if that sounds elitist. I mean, I go to a large state school, so I'm not exactly some high IQ son of millionaires, but I don't really see the point of doing the elephant walk for Uzma Kappa, right? I know a good portion of my audience sees things black and white, so this might be hard for you to digest, but this is something I can't really decide for you. For most of my sub 5 audience, I don't think this is really worth it, but I know there's a lot of guys here who are, better looking. Like, there's a good amount of people who just add me on Discord just to brag. And I'm like, why are you even here? But for those people who are watching right now, who are in that looks level, ideally 6 out of 10, normie interests, you actually might flourish in this type of environment. It could be a good way for you to be exposed to a lot of girls in sororities, and to party frequently. I sometimes see my acquaintances post formals they went to as sororities and frats, and they seem to have a good time, because formals are effectively the college equivalent of prom or homecoming for college students. My school has a relatively small Greek life scene, so I don't really feel like I'm missing out on that much, but I can't help but think that this would have been a chance for me to finally somewhat achieve those memories I missed out on during high school prom. As for ways to entertain yourself outside of Greek life, if you're like me and don't really get invited to things that often, your best bet is to just go out on your own. Now, don't fool yourself and think it's as fun as having friends to do things with, but it is a small step up, especially considering my freshman year, my roommates, Ned and Jake, would just go to an empty lecture hall at night to play video games, since the internet at our dorms wasn't that good. And I just tagged along. So while other people were out getting wasted and partying, I was playing COD with Jake. Now seriously, how pathetic is that? So then in sophomore year, I decided to just venture out on my own. Sure, I eventually got lucky like 2 years ago and finally ascended after clown maxing at the club alone like a dweeb. But it gets old. Like, people ask me why I stopped night ghouling on my own. It's because it gets boring, man. It just gets old really fast. And on top of that, people start wondering where the hell all your friends are. A good number of my acquaintances I know from high school and college go to the bar, and it became incredibly awkward for me to just loiter there by myself. Like, it's just not normal. I actually think randos I didn't even know saw me just hanging out there by myself. And eventually it became a running gag. Like, some random girl who kept seeing me was always trying to say hi to me. And before you guys are like, oh, that means she likes you. No, it was more of like a patronizing thing. Like when the popular kids in school try to befriend the weird kids as a joke. It's like the adult version of that. There's a social media personality, kind of like this Indian international student who just takes pictures with all the blonde sorority girls at his college. Everyone's congratulating him on socializing, but all I see is just gesture maxing, man. Like, the only reason why this blew up online is because it's literally just juxtaposition. It's juxtaposing some guy on one end of the social spectrum with people on the other. Like, it's just comedic. People go there just to laugh at how out of place he looks among them. Don't get me wrong, it's messed up, but I don't think he really gets that they're laughing at him and not with him. Like I said, eventually people get bored with bar hopping. So instead you see them all post on social media about how they threw a huge party you weren't invited to. For instance, I remember on the last day of freshman year, many people in my major threw a huge party, and one of the only people they didn't invite from the major was me. They all started posting in the group chat about how they were all going to meet up, and since I was in that group chat, I drunkenly slid up and was like, yo, I'ma come too, since I was beginning my night ghouling phase back then. And as soon as I got back to the dorm, which mind you, I lived at, they all straight up cleared out. Like they all went downstairs and I was like, oh shit. Because I realized at that point, they didn't actually like me. They just so happened to end the party as soon as I said I'd come. I mean, looking back on it, that was like the first brutal reminder that things just wouldn't work out. And just in general, don't go or ask to go to things you aren't invited to. This is something I only figured out later on, but since I figured they were nice to my face, and since they were all writing in the majors group chat, I kinda assumed they'd be cool with me coming. And you wanna know what the really ironic part was? They all exited out of my dorm, which means that while I was out, they were all probably partying upstairs in the floor that's right above where I lived.
All these bitches hate you. This is something I know.
We may have been receiving our education inside the classroom, but the real education was going on in the hallways in between classes.
You're the only one I notice. It's really hard for me to focus, yeah.
You don't want people blacklisting you and thinking you're too lame to be around them. And the quickest way to do this is by having a Oneitis in college. Oneitis in general is just cope. If you're like 16 years old, you're excused. But if you're some 20-year-old dude still obsessing over Oneitis, I don't even know what to tell you. You definitely shouldn't be obsessing over Oneitis when you're in college though, especially. First of all, you're probably surrounded by the largest amount of women your age, so there's plenty of options. And second, for those first 2 years, it seems like no one's really interested in a long-term relationship. After like the third year or so, I started seeing a small amount of people dating more, but for the most part, people are just trying to get that hookup phase out of their system. I'm not saying it's impossible, but the rule of thumb is that college is better for short-term or one-night stands, whereas high school seems to have more long-term relationships. Again, if you're sub 5, you'll probably miss out on most, if not all of this, so it might as well be relevant. But my point is, there are so many girls on campus. There's not been 1 year I've been here where I haven't simultaneously liked more than one girl. And of course, I never pulled any of them, and since I basically got set my own way, nowadays I just try to focus on graduating. And getting rejected by girls can cause larger problems down the line. Like if you get rejected by one girl in a friend group, you end up poisoning the well, and the rest of her friends don't like you. And dude, I've seen entire friend groups dissipate overnight because of things like this. You'll legit get blacklisted by large groups of people if you get rejected by even one person. And I know that voice in the back of your mind that's like, oh, maybe I should take that risk, shoot my shot, because I was there too. But bro, no. Sometimes you just know the answer. People legit get mad at you if you're not attractive, and you ask them out. You'll end up just embarrassing yourself and making them mad. And the last thing you need is potential doors closing on you. For instance, some of you guys have been asking about my friend Drew, who I've discussed on this channel before. Where we left off last time, he was basically still obsessing over this girl who he was convinced was in love with him. He was still reeling from his rejection by another girl, who we'll call Abby. Abby, by what Drew told me, was into him, and even invited him out to get cookies with the rest of her friends. He eventually tried his luck with her, asking her out, to which she rejected him. That wasn't enough for him though, as he told me this was not confirmation of a final decision. He once again sent another message, delivering her another ultimatum, hoping to change her decision, to which she told him,
I am not interested in a relationship. For the final time, get this through your head. I do not want to date you.
And this put my good friend into a deep bout of depression, where his 4.0 dropped to what he called a disgusting, unacceptable 3.9 after his A- in organic chemistry, which he blamed on the stress Abby put on him. Following this rejection by Abby, he told me he needed to focus on himself, and I agreed. He kept trying to convince me that the reason she rejected him was because of our TA Victor and how he told everybody, and she lost interest. Dubious claim if you ask me, but anyway, we spent the summer studying for the MCAT and hanging out one-on-one. I grew much closer to Drew, and he remains one of my best friends. Well, brushing aside the fact that I haven't seen him in months, but that's whatever. Anyway, the first day of classes last year, we sat next to each other for biochemistry. When the intro lecture was over, we both stepped outside, walking to the nearest restaurant. You see, Drew always made it a point to always eat out twice a day. I chalked it up to him just getting sick of the food at home as a commuter student. While we walked a good 20 minutes to find a place Drew hadn't eaten at several times the last week, He turned around and told me,
Hey, did you hear all those girls to the right of us talking?
They were wondering if some guy in our class was single.
"No, I didn't," I replied.
Well, you did come in a bit later. I wonder who they were talking about.
The next day, we got our answer.
Hey, so I overheard those girls again? Turns out they were talking about me.
Oh, for real? Keep in mind, I'm a naive doofus. If you found a way to convince me that the sky was red, I would believe you.
Yeah, man.
He shot back.
They're trying to set me up with this girl. Did you see her in our class?
No, I didn't, I said. He was convinced that he was overhearing all these girls in our class talking about setting him up with this random girl that he claimed to see alongside them. I was like, okay, whatever, makes sense. In my head, I was thinking, Drew, you're crazy. Now, I don't think Drew is a bad-looking guy by any means, so I somewhat went along with it. I wouldn't say he was an 8 or 9, outside of what he would tell you, but kind of in that realm of looks where he might pull it off. And this went on for a couple of months. And if you see my older videos, you know how cocky this dude was. He was legit convinced that every girl was obsessed with him. And more than that, he thought our entire biochem class was in on this plan to get him with this girl. He told me to not tell a single soul, since even mentioning it would ruin their plan, like what happened with Abby. There were days where I would allude to it in class, and he would get mad at me and shushed me, saying that if even one person heard about it, it would all be over. Every day was spent talking about this girl, who he, with full conviction, thought was in love with him. I remember one day he asked me,
So, dude, where should we go when she asked me out? A coffee place? Ice cream?
and I'm like, bro, we haven't even gotten there yet. Eventually, we realized she was simply too intimidated to ask my dear friend Drew out, so we figured we needed to extend an olive branch and have him do it. Well, I would do it on his behalf. But still, he even told me over messages that no matter what, even if he got cold feet, we would get it done this week. No ands, ifs, or buts about it. So we waited for the next possible opportunity to see her. And he had to point her out to me, because I still didn't understand who the fuck he was talking about. He surreptitiously pointed to her in the library after he spotted this girl after class. I walked up to her. I explained the situation, that my friend Drew was interested, and wanted to know if she'd like to go out sometime. Her response,
I've never seen that guy in my life.
So I pointed to Drew, standing there looking confident as ever, and me and this girl both looked genuinely confused.
I've never been in your biochem class. I don't even take biochem.
Oh shit, this girl Drew had been obsessing over for months. Yeah, so she really wasn't in our class, and I wasn't as blind or deaf as Drew claimed I was. She was never there. Everything he thought he'd been hearing, all those conversations setting them up, none of it was real. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, looking back, in hindsight, there were signs I probably should have picked up on. This one time Drew and I were walking, he mentioned that he had an ear for things that people normally didn't hear. And at the time, I thought he was just being his usual cocky self, claiming he was more perceptive than everyone else. I didn't realize he was literally hearing things. But yeah, I walked back to Drew and tried to explain what happened, but he just pulled the strings of his hoodie around his head in shame. I definitely felt bad for him, but I was also somewhat relieved since he would finally shut the fuck up about it. Oh my god, it was so annoying. But I didn't realize how badly it actually affected him. Over the next few weeks, Drew began to change. The cocky, optimistic guy I knew became quieter, more paranoid. I just kind of figured he'd get over it, but no. He dropped out of our biochem class the week after, and in that week he dropped the class, I got a call from 2 acquaintances of mine in my major, who later told me they'd seen Drew muttering to himself about these conspiracies, becoming increasingly agitated. So they took him to the medical unit a block off campus, where he was eventually transferred to the psychiatric ward for like 2 months straight. But on that day when this whole thing went down, I passed my acquaintances, and they told me that they wanted me to come there since I hung out with Drew the most, and they had to go to class. So they asked me to watch over him, but the healthcare worker who was looking over him told me they put him on a 72-hour hold, and then thanked me before graciously kicking me out. Yeah, so all those times I was like, oh, Drew, you're losing your mind. Turns out he was actually losing his mind. According to what my acquaintances told me, Drew started talking about how Abby's friends were after him, how they were plotting with his mother to poison his food. Suddenly, his habit of eating out twice a day made more sense. He was afraid to eat at home. Dude, only God could write a plot twist like this. He never finished that semester, lost his TA position after going AWOL, and completely destroyed his GPA. When he came back for the spring semester, he decided to stay in the vacant room that my roommate Jake had dropped out of. But he didn't make it far. He dropped out during May, and since then I think he's just been needing for like the last 6 months. And I understand that you guys say that undiagnosed mental health played a huge part in this. I definitely do agree, because the social workers that kept calling me about information regarding his case were telling me that he was hallucinating. But you have to also realize that the Oneitis he had also did him in. If he had just stopped obsessing over this one girl, he would have completely avoided the situation. And you guys might also wonder why I didn't BP this guy. Dude, some people you just can't BP. If I explained this to him, he would just smile like an idiot and be like, "Got it, bro," and then go back to his usual programming. I've tried BPing people in the past, and it's just made them get mad at me. My point is, Drew was a brilliant guy with a near perfect 4.0 and a bright future ahead of him. Dude was set to take the MCAT and probably go to med school next year, but now he's a year behind with his GPA basically halved. And for what? Some girl who didn't even know he existed? I hung out with him once since he effectively dropped out for the semester, but I haven't seen him since. However, he texted me and said he'll be back for this year. I'm really hoping he learns his lesson and unironically goes full Sigma and just forgets about girls. But knowing him though, it might just go back to the same old thing. If you haven't figured this out yet based on what I've told you so far, I can make it crystal clear for you with my next lesson. Another thing you have to realize is that everything is more transactional and fake in college compared to in high school. Like I said, this is your first taste of adulthood, and most people in the workplace and the real world are going to be like this too. Contrasting this with high school, for the most part, if someone didn't like me, they'd just say it to my face. That's just how teenagers are, no filter. But in college, people have grown past this whole direct rudeness, and instead people are just insanely fake. Like, as an example, there was this Arab Chad guy. I'm just gonna call him Chidam Hussein for the sake of this video. Now, Chidam was like, "Oh, dude, we should totally work together in lab this semester, since we had a small class together and we kind of got to know each other a bit better." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, man, sounds good." And so I texted him a little bit in advance, a few weeks before the semester, and I was like, "Oh, dude, make sure to write down my name and Isaac's name." Isaac's another friend that I ran cross country with in high school, and we were both in the same major, so I kind of grew close to him again. And Chidam straight up didn't answer my text. And that's the #1 red flag when it comes to people. I get that not everyone can reply in 5 minutes, but at least I could tolerate people who respond late. That's understandable. But to not answer at all when something like this and I need to have my groups finalized before class, I mean, that just made me mad, to be honest. And low-key, I should have seen this coming. I remember in sophomore year, Chidam said he was going to study OChem with me for the final, and so I came to the library, which was like 20 minutes by foot from where I live. And when I texted him and was like, "Yo, where you at?" he just didn't answer me. And when I went downstairs, I straight up saw him studying with some other people. So like I said, I should have seen the red flags, but I was still a bit admittedly pissed. The following semester, I saw Chidam sitting with a bunch of girls, and all these girls felt the need to take like 30 pictures of him in class and upload to their stories. And Chidam himself was on his phone every 5 minutes in class. So I know for a surefire fact, he saw all my messages a few weeks earlier when I needed to get my groups finalized. And now moving away from the social aspect, I think this is a good time to transition into academics. Now I know a lot of you guys are here for social advice, but I feel the need to desperately convey this information for you, because I really wish somebody was here to tell me this kind of stuff. Academics are even more of a headache than the social aspect, which leads me to a very important point, which is finding resources to pass your classes. And this goes for high school as well, but in college, I found that studying with other people is far easier, unless it's Chidam, in which case, fuck him, I don't give a shit. If you make a bad impression on other people who are in your major or adjacent to it, you basically just signed yourself up for veteran difficulty when it comes to studying. You fucked up big time, buddy. You need to be bailed out by your cohorts during those exam weeks. This semester, like just today, as of recording this video, I walked into my classes, and fortunately, I have a friend, and I use the term friend very loosely, to sit with in each class, which makes it just a bit more bearable. However, last semester in the spring, and this is a strange phenomenon I've noticed, but fall semester is always better than spring semester for whatever reason. I basically did not have a single friend in any of my classes in the spring, and as a result, there were so many lectures during the spring that I missed simply because I had no motivation to attend them. And the only social outlet I had was work. Remember that emptiness I talked about earlier? It's gonna feel 10 times stronger if you have no one in your classes that you get along with. Okay, even if you don't like studying with people, which is a very common claim I hear, you're still gonna need other people for resources such as study guides, notes, etc. And what you wanna do is accumulate these resources from past years that you can barter with other people in order to learn from. Unless you're super attractive and charismatic, you will find that people won't just hand the shit over for you. At least in my case. Usually, you have to give them some material in return. Now, I don't have any older siblings, or any siblings at all for that matter, so I had to find things on my own for the most part. I found some old stuff from Course Hero, not sponsored, and you need a subscription that costs a pretty penny for, but it saved my ass so many times in those miserable lab courses that I had to take. And sometimes I'd take these documents, and I'd email them to my classmates, and in return, it'd give me an old exam that they got from one of their older siblings in a previous year. So my point is, these resources are like currency, and unless you have some, you are completely cooked. And this is another reason why poisoning the well is imperative to your success. If people don't like you, they're going to be less willing to help you out. There's this girl in my major who is pretty much universally hated by everyone she speaks to. I mean, I can't really attest to this, because the only time I ever spoke to her was when I visited her friend's dorm, and she was dorming with like 7 other girls, one of which was this girl. And this girl put out a taser when she was meeting us. Now, you might be thinking, oh, Drayyythan, this is your fault for being sub 5, that's why she pulled out the taser. Nah, for once, I had nothing to do with this. One of the other people we were with got into a discussion about something. Can't remember what, but one thing led to another, and the subject of the fucking taser came out. And she went back into her room, pulled out the fucking taser, and started waving it to show us. And on this night, I got very lucky that I didn't accidentally get, fried in this encounter. And to this day, I don't think she was that bad, but for whatever reason, people in my major despise her, probably because she asks like 50,000 questions in class for everything, which is kind of ridiculous if you ask me, since you're paying a crazy high tuition to be there. You might as well squeeze the professors for as much information as possible. But I digress. People don't like her, they say she's obnoxious, and as a result, no one shares any of the documents with her. And that's another example of the normie hive mind. They will literally find reasons to hate you, especially if you're unattractive, which this girl I would say kind of is, to be honest. And the thing is, I genuinely feel bad for her. And as for more academic advice, let me tell you a story to illustrate my next point. When I was younger, I was definitely raised to be your run-of-the-mill South Asian nerd who had his nose buried in his homework. In fact, one of my earliest memories as a child is my father coming back late in the night with a stack of workbooks that he so graciously handed me. Besides my Lego Duplos and some cartoons I had on DVD, I didn't really have much else to entertain myself. So, I began working through them. And the parent pill was actually quite evident here. If I had been given, a dumbbell instead of workbooks, who knows? I could have become a varsity athlete in my teen years instead. And to make it clear, these workbooks were like simple 2nd grade, 3rd grade math that I was doing when I was 5, right? Just math and reading problems. I don't want you to think that I was exactly solving complex fluid mechanics problems or something like that, as if I was the next Einstein. But nevertheless, I was a bit ahead where I should have been. If you were to ask me to rank myself academically, I would say I was the worst of the best in school. I always did well in the general classes I was in throughout my elementary and middle school years. When I was mostly taking AP, college credit, and honors classes in high school, I was clearly the dumbest one in those classes. Like, the smartest kids who surrounded me in those classrooms were the ones who seemed to just effortlessly pass everything, almost as if they knew everything ahead of time. And it turns out they did. Like, I remember this one dude, used to be my friend, had an older brother who graduated a decade before him. This dude already knew which teachers were going to be the hardest, which ones to avoid, what types of questions teachers wrote, all down to the exact punctuation. And to be fair, he had huge shoes to fill, because from what I could gather, his parents were extremely tough on him. Generic East Asian tiger parents who got mad at him for everything, and didn't really do much with him besides tell him to study harder. I remember he was obsessed with Fortnite when we were freshmen in high school. He didn't have a console to play it on, but he had a phone I gave him since I got a new one, and I felt bad, so I was like, alright, well, here, you could have this. And that's another thing, don't beta bucks your friends, that's a completely different video for a different day. But, just don't give people free shit, because, both of us just went our separate ways, and he stabbed me in the back. Again, that's something for a different day, but just putting that out there. Anyways, I remember there were multiple occasions where I'd play with him and Jake, since we were all in a friend group back when I had a decent amount of friends. And his dad came in while we were playing Fortnite, and yelled at him. Like, just burst into his room. And he went offline eventually, but not before I heard him crying and arguing from the other side. I could tell, based on his experiences, the dude was hungry to get out of that household. Again, my parents are strict, definitely stricter than normie parents, and I have my own fair share of horrid memories, but My parents always kind of knew early on I wasn't cut out to compete with these kids, so I can't even imagine what his home life was like. And I knew another East Asian guy, only child like me, and this other dude was like one of 20 kids in our math class. And keep in mind that these 20 were selected to skip a grade in math. So all of us took Algebra 2 as freshmen instead of sophomores. It was already bad enough that I struggled in math, but to be fair, I never really took an interest in mathematics. I was always a bigger fan of writing and English. And in fact, if it paid the bills, I would just become a freelance writer. Not that I don't enjoy biological sciences and medicine, but again, off topic. Even aside from that, this dude seemed to do all these math problems in his sleep. He was always one step ahead. And I remember my first week of class in high school. Keep in mind, he went to the other middle school in the district. So this is one of the first impressions I had of him. He started bawling his eyes out since he got 100 on the exam, as opposed to 102 by solving the extra credit. Meanwhile, I was fighting tooth and nail to get a B, and both his parents were loaded. His mom picked him up in a Lexus, and he was paying thousands of dollars in tennis lessons, as much as he likes to deny it, since he was 5 years old, which landed him a varsity spot on the tennis team. And the third example I want to use was our valedictorian in high school, who was this tall South Asian guy, cocky loudmouth. I'm gonna keep it $150, but I hated this dude, still do. I think he realized that nobody really had respect for me in high school, so he would just take the piss on me for validation from normies. For instance, I remember this one time in math class, the teacher asked us to pair up, and she suggested that this dude and I work together. And he was like, "Oh, I don't like him," in front of the whole class. Bruh, that teacher probably thought we were all friends just because we all looked the same. She probably couldn't even tell all the South Asian kids in that class apart. Because we were all like those Decepticon seeker jets from Transformers, right? The same framelit build, with glasses, skinny body, with slightly different paint jobs. But aside from that, I remember my mom was talking to his mom during some writing competition, and my mom told me that his mom said he was very enthusiastic about learning. Keep in mind, this is probably why he always managed to do well. He didn't have that mental blockage that came with consistently failing and whatnot. He always made sure to look at things ahead of time, flew through his classes, and got praise for it. And do you see what's common with all three of these guys that I just brought up? Well, the thing is, all three of these dudes clearly had a combination of foresight, knowledge, and more importantly, positive reinforcement when it came to their education. Looking back on it, I never really realized how important a head start was until a few years ago. The only reason I did well in classes when I was younger was because I learned all the material years in advance. But as I got into high school, I stopped caring. I would have probably remained one of those study drones like those guys, but I wanted to be normal, like a guy with a girlfriend, a social life, and a reason to live outside of the textbook. And as a result, I stopped looking at things ahead of time. I struggled. I diverged from the study cell path when I kind of just gained sentience when I fell for my first Oneitis in middle school. And suddenly, I didn't feel the need to study in my free time. In fact, I didn't want people to associate me with the word smart at all. And of course, I was blue-pilled back then. I didn't realize that the battle was already decided before I even got a chance to open my mouth. All that time I tried gesturing, showing that I was capable of being a quote-unquote likable guy, was basically for nothing. My point is, if you're like me, basically just socially isolated, undesirable, and nobody really contacts you except to ask for something, you might as well spend all that time studying, getting ahead, because at least you could live comfortably if you do well in your classes, even if you miss out on social experiences, because you're going to miss them either way. All three of those dudes I mentioned went to top 20 private universities. Two of those guys were my high school valedictorians, and one of them is making straight bank at Goldman Sachs, while I sit here seething. And more importantly, all 6 parents amongst those 3 guys probably used me as an example of a failure, as an example of how not to be. They were probably like, study harder, you don't want to end up like Drayyythan, do you? Maybe if I didn't try to combat my life script, maybe I could have gone to a more prestigious university, or even become valedictorian myself. Or maybe that's just wishful thinking. But the truth is, we'll never really know. That's why now, I just study everything ahead of time. Ideally, you want to plan out all your courses years in advance and study them all years in advance. But if you can't do that, you want to at least be exposed to all the content once and have a general idea of how it works a month before starting class. My goal is to know everything just well enough that the lesson of the day is just review to me. Of course, I don't go around telling people this since I don't want to come off as a sweat, but instead as a guy who just happens to learn things effortlessly. So recently, what I've been doing is finding a syllabus for the course I'm taking that's from like a prior year, that's recent enough, or from the upcoming year if the professor is fast with it. And I put that all into a generative AI. I know most people use ChatGPT, but really you can just use any generative AI for this. I really recommend subscribing to just one chatbot service and paying for it for the 3 to 5 years you're at college. Even outside of the most obvious use, which is just to use it to weasel your way out of learning and get to do all your assignments, you couldn't use it more effectively as a tool to teach you or partially guide you through the assignments. And you guys who are still in high school watching this are lucky, because I don't even remember how we wrote essays by hand before ChatGPT was a thing. Listen, I wrote this whole script out, 18 pages worth of content for this script, and this took me fucking forever to do. Having a chatbot to work with and riff off of your own thoughts and questions gives me a small feeling of accomplishment that I wouldn't get by just staring at a textbook or notes. Of course, the AI isn't always accurate and can make mistakes, but this is a rare occurrence, especially if you give it your course materials. And Google Gemini has a plan where they give you a free year to use their services, including Google Veo, which is what I'm currently using in the place of Cloud AI, which is my go-to for 2 years before then. And again, I'm not sponsored by either of them. As I previously mentioned, I just throw the syllabus for the class in there, and I can get ahead by knowing what will be covered, even if it's not nearly as in-depth as it would be in class. But I had to learn this the hard way, because like I said earlier, the battle is often determined before you even get there. If you're like me, and you already have to combat the stress of isolation and tedium, the least you can do is soften up your classes as much as possible so you can get through them easier. I'm not going to say you can breeze through every class, especially those harder, top-level courses, but it will be exponentially less stressful. My old roommates, Ned and Jake, tried going about their studies alone, never making any friends, never trying to find old exams, just studying everything on their own. And both of them didn't make it past sophomore year with a GPA of less than 3.0. Granted, they were both doing engineering, which I know has a far lower GPA than pre-med in general, but I kept encouraging them to go and find friends, which they never really did. Both of them ended up dropping out and going back home. I think Ned ended up going to a local university, which is far easier than where I'm at, but he seems to be back on track. And Jake took a year off to wage slave, and is now doing his 3rd year at community college with a different major. I mean, different strokes for different folks. I can't help but think they would have done much better if they had just tried reaching out to their peers.
Especially with all this independence, you guys might turn to substances to entertain yourself. I had that phase as well, although it wasn't really the hard stuff. All I can say is test what you're using, because I know my freshman year, like a whole room of people in the apartment across from mine OD'd on coke. Now, I'd be willing to bet money they didn't die from clean coke. I have a very good feeling that it was cut with fentanyl, as most things in my area are. And outside of that, I do have to warn you, you should definitely be careful how intoxicated you are around other people. The number of relationships I've ruined, or the number of times I've embarrassed myself on something is nearly uncountable at this point. And I get it, people need to unwind after a hard week, because I don't know what it is about college lectures, but they feel even more boring than high school class, despite being spaced out and way shorter. I don't even know how I managed to go to class from 8 to 3 every day in high school, because I could barely make it through my Monday, Wednesday, Friday lecture, which is a mere 50 minutes. But hey, at least I have all the time in the world outside of that to watch BP videos. Wrong. Another piece of advice I have is to stop consuming so much drivel online, especially on BP forums and videos. Dude, you have your whole life after this to shitpost on .org. You don't want to be like Jake, cooped up in his room all day after just doom scrolling Twitter. I remember my freshman year, I took a break for watching Lookism content simply because it was overwhelmingly negative. Yes, it's the truth, but I was already getting brutal reminders simply by witnessing it IRL. I didn't need to get exposed to all that extra stuff online. You aren't really missing all that much, to be honest. Most of those guys on the forums are just miserable assholes with a crab bucket mentality anyway. You post anything and you'll be called a concoction of slurs you've never even heard of before. Keep the information you learned in the back of your mind, but don't let it consume you. And finally, you might be wondering, was college for Drayyythan better than high school? And the answer is yes. I would say it was better for me on average. The highs of college were definitely better than the highs of high school, easily. I think a huge part of that was the independence from my parents. When I was in high school, my parents never really let me go out or hang out with my friends that often. After school, I basically just sat down and studied every night until bed, just to repeat it over again. But now that I'm in college, I could at least do somewhat as I please, you know, spoofing the location on my device so my mom doesn't doesn't know I'm out. Not that I go out very often anymore, but college revealed to me that a large part of my failure in life is due to innate characteristics, and not my parents constraining me, as I'd initially thought. It really is because I'm unable to pull the girls I want, for obvious reasons. That's the harsh truth. For attractive, functional people, life is the gift that keeps on giving. Funny enough, my parents met when they were in college. I think my mom was like 21 then, so she was the same age that I currently am. At this point, I'm checked out, even a few days into my final year. I'm just stuck, isolated, semi-homesick, and I just want to get my degree and leave. I've already tried and failed in certain aspects, and I will probably look back and cringe at all of this, to be honest. But yeah, that's all I had for this one. It's already getting too long. This is my first video in nearly 2 months, because my last video was a re-upload from March, because you see my laptop broke, and luckily I got a new one free of charge from Best Buy, since it was under warranty. Crazy to think I've been through 2 laptops since I started uploading on this channel. I guess the hardware couldn't take all the brutal truth bombs I was putting down, and just ended itself. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to review some anatomy before class. I'll catch you guys next time.
The party is going on. But eventually it's gonna hit midnight and people are gonna have to go home. And they're gonna have to walk through that group of uninvited.
I'm everything that you want to be, wanna be. Now I give it all to the way, but you talk for me. Now I fuck you every way, God, I want to. I need you wanna get close, and you bother me. I mean, there's something get close, but you bother me. Now I get it if we get blow, but you bother me. One lady, I get so, but you honor me.
This is a certified PSL classic.
The light to say you go home.